Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Verbum Day, lectionary podcast, Transcendent Truth Media. We've been on a hiatus, been writing some books, been editing some books, been publishing some books. And so now, if in case you did not know, you can get the Chipre service book, not only the free PDF from the website, but you can also, this is for since last year, you can get the paperback on Amazon. But now you can also get it in Kindle because some people were asking for it uh, on Kindle. And so the PDF is free. The Kindle is at bare minimum price, which I think is 99 cents US. I don't know what that is in Canadian because our money's fake. But you can also get now the Achipere liturgical commentary, the liturgical theology book, which is a commentary on the lectionaries of the church, with the Achipere service book as its basis. You can get that also. Currently in Kindle, you can get it in paperback. You cannot yet get it in free PDF. We are still working on that. But if you want the free PDF, even though I've not yet put it on the site or Roland has not yet, it's not yet on the site, you can um you can reach out to me, my email, or you can put a comment on this video below and say, hey, I would love a free PDF of that. I'll send it to you. If you do send an email to the Transcendent Truth Media Network email, I'm pretty sure I lost the passwords. So, but if you find my own personal email or you leave a comment down below, then I'll send it to you. So, anyways, yeah, we're coming back to the lectionary. Again, I know it's been a while, and I know we haven't been podcasting as regularly as we probably should be, but here we are. This is Revised Common Lectionary. We are in year B. And we won't be playing catch up with the ones we missed. We're just going to keep rolling after this. I think we are probably going to be looking at the 1 year lectionary for a bit and then jumping back into the 3 year with the LCMS cycle just to cover all our bases. So we're looking this morning at, I am usually always about track 2, about the complementary track, which is really where the lectionary becomes the lectionary and it starts showing us how the text interacts and making those texts interact themselves, weaving the Old Testament and the Psalm and the New Testament epistle together with that foundational gospel text on which it's all coming to a head in Jesus Christ. But and usually I'll say something maybe about the Lectio Continua track, the semi-continuous track. Usually I'll just pass it by or maybe say a quick thing or two. But here on this day, we have something that's really too important, really too special. And that is Nathan and David and Nathan's indictment against David and David's confession, not only to Nathan, but then to the Lord in Psalm 51. So we're going to look at this first. If you don't know the context, you can just go back. If you have a lectionary on hand or a service book on hand, you can look at the readings from before. It's just the preceding context from this text in 2 Samuel. And of course, in case you didn't know, the rundown is David has lots of women. But because he's finding his peace, his hope, his joy in women, in sex, he's never fulfilled. He's always feeling empty, always desiring more, always wanting more. And so he sees one, but she's married. But he's the king, so that's not a problem. He sleeps with her, commits adultery. Her husband is on the front lines fighting for David. He brings that husband back, says, sleep with your wife, basically, so he doesn't get caught doing it. He won't do it anyways. David ends up having him killed, and he feels bad about this. Well, he doesn't really, but now he will, right? So now the prophet Nathan is bringing this accusation against the king and says, when the wife of Uriah, and that's Bathsheba, when the wife of Uriah heard that her husband had died, and this is because David had him killed, basically, had him sent to the front lines in the heat of the battle where there was no chance that he would make it, right? She mourned her Lord. But once the mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her into his house. Now she became his wife. She bears him a son. But in the sight of the Lord, what David did was evil. And I think in the sight of pretty much anybody, what David did was evil. This is not just adultery. This is adultery plus having the husband of the wife get murdered, basically, for you. And the whole time, he's like a happy puppy dog dying for his master. Like he loves to die for his king. And his king, what's is his king like? Oh, thank you for being such a loyal. No, his king is like, oh, your wife is hot. I'm gonna sleep with her and have you killed because of it. This is it's the worst, some of the worst behavior that you can exhibit as a human being. And what's so interesting about this, again, just to pull ourselves out of this kind of context, we need to remember, of course, David is the one that the Lord makes that covenant with, that the Lord chooses to establish that throne, that kingdom, that kingship through which his only begotten Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, will reign over the people of Israel and the whole world, right? David is the one after the Lord's own heart. David is the great prophet. David is the greatest psalmist, right? David is the hymnist of the church and of Israel before this. And yet, so people would think, oh, well, oh, I'm nothing like the prophets. I'm nothing like the apostles. And we can talk about the apostles too, right? How many of them stuck around? Well, we're going to be looking at that in the gospel. But these are awful people, just like you and just like me. We look at David, right? Is he a paragon of virtue? No, all right. Well, this is like some of the worst behavior ever exhibited by anybody in any place in any time, and yet here it is, man after the Lord's own heart, man of who is the king over God's people, man who is the prophet and the king. And when he takes the showbread, this is because he's foreshadowing the prophet, priest, and king. This is the type of Christ, right? And yet it's really human when he gets down to his idolatry and his sin. Of course, he's not worshiping actual false gods like theistic ones like his son Solomon does. But Solomon too. Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. Solomon wrote the Song of Solomon. Solomon wrote the Wisdom of Solomon, right? I mean, unless you're one of those conspiracy theorists that think every book of the Bible's fake or something, right? But what do we see in all of these guys, right? That they're finding their hope, they're fearing something, they're trusting something that's not the Lord, that's not God. They're committing idolatry. They're giving themselves not only into idolatry, having the husband of the woman killed, right? And so the Lord sees this as obviously evil, obviously evil. Unless we think, for example, well, even though he was evil, even though he was one of the worst people that had ever lived, because he had faith, the Lord sees him as perfect and spotless. That's not what sola fide means. And we see this here. The Lord sees this, he demands repentance or else death, right? The Lord sent Nathan to David. And when he comes to him, he says, tell me how you judge this case. In a certain town, he's not saying you did this, right? Of course, that's what's happening. But he says, tell me how you would judge this case. In a certain town, there were two men, one rich, one poor. You know the story. We don't have to read it all, right? It's this poor guy, he has like one lamb. The rich guy, he has thousands of lambs, right? But the rich guy, he has a visitor coming, takes the poor guy's lamb, slaughters it, kills it. But that was the pet of the poor guy. Now he's so sad, right? David hears this, right? And he grows very angry with the man. And he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves death. Well, isn't that the truth? Right? And this is so characteristic of all of humanity. When we view our sin, when we view our wickedness, when we view our evil from outside of us, and we're not saying, what do you think about what you have done? If we think about that, we're going to start justifying ourselves. We're going to start making excuses for ourselves. We're going to say, well, I did this because and such, or I deserved, and so on and so on. But if you look at it from outside, well, you're going to respond to it like you do other people, judgmentally, critically. And when you see something awful, something wrong, something mean, something evil, you're not going to say, oh, yeah, it's okay. You're not going to justify it. You're not going to make excuses for it. You're going to condemn it. This man, whoever did this, which, yeah, that's him, deserves death, right? He shall make fourfold restitution for the lamb because he's done this and was unsparing. And Nathan said to David, And this is the great reveal of our sin. You're the man. You are the man. And this is exactly what's basically supposed to happen. Not only when we read this story, this text, this indictment, when we read the whole Old Testament. I mean, we see passage after passage, you see Cain and Abel. You see him not bring the right sacrifice, get mad, angry murder his brother, right? You see Noah getting drunk in the vineyard he plants. You see the sons dishonoring their father Noah, right? You see all of humanity try and make a name for itself at the Tower of Babel. You see Abraham lying. I mean, maybe you don't go as far as pretending your wife's your sister and letting her marry someone else, but we all, the thing is, we see the evil, we see the sin, and we're disgusted by it. But what we fail to do is to recognize the sin of other people in ourselves. But this is the beauty of this text. It's showing us, right, this kind of way of making known to the sinner that the sin which disgusts everybody, is also in us ourselves, right? If only we have eyes to see that. But then he says, "But thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your Lord's house and your Lord's wives for your own. I gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if this were not enough, I could count up for you still more." That is, like, if you had asked, right? "Why have you despised the Lord and done what is evil in his sight? You've cut down Uriah the Hittite with the sword. His wife you took as your own, and him you killed with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house." This is a curse, right? There's what do you call this? Consequences to your actions, right? So is he forgiven? Yes. But the sword truly doesn't depart from his house. Not only does his son that he has with Bathsheba die, but the whole house of his kingdom is split from his grandson's fault. And his children all end up killing each other, some of them raping each other. It gets very strange, right? But all of this is what? All of this is the result of sin, death, and evil, right? And this is what happens. Sin breeds more sin. Sin does it cause good things? No, it causes sin, right? But then he realizes this, of course. And he says, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan answered David, "For his part, the Lord has removed your sin. You shall not die." And so we have forgiveness, but is that consequence removed? No. "But since you have utterly spurned the Lord by this deed, the child born to you shall surely die." Now we're going to look at a psalm which is directly related to that text in 2 Samuel. And you should all know this psalm very well. This is basically the invitatory psalm of the Orthodox churches of East and Orient, right? Where we have Psalm 95, they have where they would call it Psalm 50 because of the Septuagint numbering. But we have this in our churches in the West in the Liturgy of the Hours every Friday. Friday being definitely a penitential day because on Friday our Lord was crucified. So this should be very familiar to us. We read, "Have mercy on me, O God, in accord with your merciful love. In your abundant compassion, blot out my transgressions. Thoroughly wash away my guilt, and from my sins cleanse me. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you always have I sinned. I've done what is evil in your eyes, so that you are just in your word, and without reproach in your judgment. Behold, I was born in guilt, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you desire true sincerity, and secretly you teach me wisdom. Cleanse me with hyssop, and I shall be made pure. Wash me, and I shall be made whiter than snow. You will let me hear gladness and joy, and the bones you crushed will rejoice. Turn away your face from my sins and blot out my iniquities. A clean heart create for me, God. Renew me with a steadfast spirit." So what are we reading? What are we hearing, right? Of course, we're looking at a text just before this, and it's supposed to be coupled these two together. If you're going to do this, and this is the thing with the Revised Common Lectionary and its two tracks, if you're doing the semi-continuous don't really have a lot to say about the epistle and the gospel, but they have a lot to say about each other, right? And this, if you take these two texts together from the Old Testament, the Second Samuel reading and Psalm 51, what are we seeing? We're seeing a man who commits like a really awful sin. Like we're not saying, oh, he lied, he lusted, he got upset, or he committed road rage or something. No, like he is the cause of someone's death. He committed adultery. He stole someone's wife. He's a homewrecker, a murderer, and the result of that is his own son dies, which shouldn't even be his son. This is a horrible situation. So he's really in deep in sin, deep in broken. And like, how many of us is that? To that extent, not that many, but some of us, right? For sure. But we can all relate to this, right? And David is so deep that is he going to be able to understand what he's done, or is he going to be blinded by that? Well, sometimes you're so deep in your sin that you can't even think about it because it will crush you. The guilt and the shame is too much for you. And we see this all the time in the church. We see people in the church who make crazy confessions, especially on their deathbeds, right? Obviously, I'm not going to tell you any of them, but right. But it's the kind of thing where people will hold something in that's so serious. Of course, we're talking adultery. Of course, we're talking paternity fraud. Of course, we're talking murder. We are. We're talking theft. We're talking fraud. We're talking all kinds of things. We're talking rape, right? All kinds of biblical sins, like biblical proportioned sins, like real bad, like flood version sins, right? And so well, what do you do when you're in that situation? A lot of the time you'll hide from it. A lot of the time you'll kick it behind your soul in what you think is the back closet of your mind, but it's not. It's still there. But what we see in Second Samuel is that even though David couldn't bring himself to confess that sin, and that's what you really need to do. Like when you're that deep, even if you're not that deep, even if you're shallow in sin, confess your sin. Go to confession. Call your pastor. Call your priest, get it done, speak it out, that you might receive forgiveness and cleanse your soul. But if you can't do that, what we see here is the Lord sends the prophet. The prophet knows, right? And of course, every pastor knows something's wrong with everybody. And this is the thing. Sometimes we go into a pastoral care visit, a visitation. And every time I go, I always say, do you have any sins that you need to confess? And usually, what's the answer? No, pastor, I've done no sins, right? Oh, really? Right? But this is the thing. We go in there knowing their sins. And so what does he do? He draws the confession out of him. And even before it comes, he says, you're this man. You're this man. You've already condemned yourself, right? And so David, now he understands. Where does that leave him? Finally, he's free to confess it because he's been called out for it, right? And he knows he doesn't just need forgiveness, he needs cleansing, he needs purification, right? That's why he doesn't just say, have mercy on me, don't condemn me to hell. No, but he says, wash me, wash it away, cleanse me, right? Blot it out. Hide your eyes from it, yes, but also completely remove it from me that I may be pure, that I may be whiter than snow, that my iniquities might be blotted out, that you would actually create something good and clean within me after you destroy the dirty and the evil that is in me. And that's beautiful. So now we're going to look at Exodus 16, 2 through 4 and 9 through 15. And this, again, this is the thing which is attached to all the things.